of the International Review of Economics, co-editor-in-chief of the International Review of Economics and Finance. And these, as we will see, have a fair throughput of papers. And in doing that, one of the things that we as authors can never get back is time. And it may not seem like it because, things get lost, reviewers don't submit, editors, don't handle papers as quickly as we might like to. It's a human process. The one thing we can never get back is time. So if we can get a response back to an author as quickly as possible, even if it's a negative response, that's good. I mean, none of us like being rejected, but it's better to be rejected early and with some feedback than it is to wait for weeks and months. You may have seen recently a paper finally published in Review of Economics and Statistics, which was under review 4 rounds for 27 years. Now think of what you were doing 27 years ago, if you were even alive. This paper was first submitted 27 years ago and finally got accepted earlier on this year. I have to say that, that knocks my experience of 7 years into a cocked hat 3 times over. Yes, it's a great paper. Yes, it's a great journal, but wow, come on. So the objective of the ecosystem and the objective of the article transfer system, which underpins it, is to try and speed up the process for authors and editors. So let's look at the perspective of 2 journals and see what we do here. In IRFA is a general finance journal. It's got a heavy emphasis on applied and empirical finance. We rarely take purely theoretical papers. If somebody submits a purely theoretical paper to me, I will probably ask that they provide a simulation, at the least, a benchmarking, some form of data. It's an empirical journal primarily. Now we take reviews, we take meta-analyses, but primarily empirical. We want the papers to have an international twist. Now, whether that's international data, which sometimes isn't necessarily appropriate to the issue under analysis, or clear, in the absence of that, clear explanation of the international implications of the issues. So if you're looking at dividend policy in Mexico, tell me why that's important if I'm in Mauritius or if I'm in Australia. We get about maybe 600 submissions per annum. We have a policy whereby we try to incentivize. The first thing we did to try and incentivize for speed was to reward associate editors. You should remember, as authors, the journal fees do not come to me as editor. That would be nice, but that isn't how it works. They're plowed back in to the journal to support conferences, to support speedy reviews, etc. We run paper development workshops. We have associate editors from all continents, but we need more from Sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America, if anybody is interested or knows of good people. And we are moving towards I think by the end of this year, we will have a 40% female board membership. Would like to get as close to gender equality as is possible. The acceptance rate in general hovers around 15–20%. We operate a triage system. About 1/3 of the papers get desk rejected. And I always try to give at least a couple of sentences as to why the paper doesn't fit. Now, desk rejection usually means that you should get a response back within a week or 2. I try to set aside a block of time each week to do each journal. So a week or 2, you might get a response. A little bit under 1/3 get offered a transfer. And this is at the heart of the ecosystem. And then the rest get sent out for review, with maybe half of those getting accepted. Now, some of those that get rejected also get offered a transfer. So the ecosystem operates a couple of webs. We can operate a web at the start of the process and say, this isn't necessarily for us now. Or we can operate it after some reviews come in and say, look, this probably won't fly here, but actually the way it's going, it might fly there. IREF is a slightly different journal. One of co-editors, the other co-editor is Carl Chen at the University of Dayton. We get about 1,000 submissions a year. It's a general journal. We have been trying to move it a little bit back towards the intersection of economics and finance, although it would be identified, I think, by most as primarily a finance journal. The modal papers are empirical, but we are more open towards taking theoretical and conceptual papers. We take pure economics papers. We don't get as many of those as perhaps we would like. We get pure finance papers, which is great. There's perhaps historically been less emphasis on desk rejection and transfers. About 15% of papers get offered a transfer, about the same number as in IRFA get offered a desk rejection, sometimes with a transfer. There's a slightly higher acceptance rate. About 50% of the papers that get sent out for review get accepted. But of the remaining, again, some get offered a transfer. So how does the transfer work at the heart of the ecosystem? And if we think of the journey of your paper, the first toll gate you come to, we make a decision. Do we transfer the paper? Do we say, look, this is a nice paper, but it might actually better fit. It's a more institutional paper. It would better fit in a Journal of International Financial Markets, Institutions and Money, and we transfer it to Stefan too. Or do we think perhaps it's a really experimental paper, and we would transfer it to JBEF, and Stefan 1 and Michael will handle it? Or do we send it out for review? Or do we just say, look, this isn't going to work and we desk reject it? But whenever we do a transfer within the ecosystem or outside, we suggest a journal or journals. The evidence is that when you give authors a choice of 2 journals, you get a better chance of the author taking it up. It is important to remember the author is in control. She is the queen of her process. And if she does not wish to accept the offer of a transfer, that is entirely okay. The paper then, after I think a fortnight, lapses, and the paper is effectively withdrawn and goes somewhere else. And good, if I think that's the best place to go, that's absolutely correct. So you don't have to, you're not obligated to stay within the ecosystem. You are entirely in control. We have to explain why we think the ecosystem journal or another journal, hopefully the ecosystem, works best, and send out the stuff. So it's the same really as any other action. You make your decision, you suggest the course of action, you customize the email, which is really important. Again, some of editors are much more, take a lot of time, send a lot of feedback. Others of us don't necessarily spend as much time as perhaps we should. With the ecosystem, we're going to have to be a little bit better at serving you, our audience, and our authors, and explaining why we think JBEF or Helion or Finance Research Letters is the appropriate place. But the reality is that it doesn't take any more time than a reasoned desk rejection. We shouldn't be desk rejecting, and we don't desk reject papers, for fun and giggles. We desk reject because we don't think the paper will fit. And we have a reason in our mind, and it doesn't take that long to type that reason out in a couple of sentences to the author to explain our decision making. This is the least we would expect as authors. It's the least we can give to you as the editor, as the authors submitting to our journals. So let's walk through a kind of a paper. A paper comes in, it's interesting. We think, okay, this is a nice paper. Let's have a look at it. I read the abstract. I have a look at the paper. I then have a choice to make a decision. I could assign the paper to another associate editor. It could be Larissa, it could be Dirk Bauer, it could be Céline Gimet, it could be anybody else, and they could handle it. I could handle it myself and invite reviewers directly. I can make a decision there and then. I could accept the paper straight off. I can revise it. I can reject, or I can reject and offer a transfer. And this is where we're into the ecosystem. So you see this paper came in and it was with the editor for 4 days. It's important as an author as well to remember, when you submit a paper, there's a clock starts. It doesn't necessarily land on our desk the moment you submit it. It has to go through a set of checks. If there's a submission fee, has that been paid? If there's technical checks, have they been done? And they get done through the journal office in Chennai. So it might take a week or so before it actually arrives on our desk. So this is with me for 4 days. I make a decision reading the paper that the reality is this paper fits between international business, organizational theory, organizational behavior, and finance. And it's a really nice paper. But it fits better with reBAF. It's more akin to a reBAF paper than it is to an IRFA paper. So I decide, look, I'm going to offer this transfer here. And I say why. And I say, in addition, it touches on some managerial and organizational structural elements, which might best suit a journal with a more business as opposed to a more pure finance approach. So the author at least has an idea. Look, this is why the paper didn't fly to IRFA. This is what this editor thought was about. Even if it's incorrect, if I get this as an author and I say, well, that's not what the paper's about, I'm still going to think, why did the editor think that? So there's feedback here directly. And this is at the initial phase. I could, of course, come back and do exactly the same thing after reviewers. The reviewers have said that the paper is better suited because here's reviewer 1, reviewer 2. So while that was working, we got some feedback, and the clear feedback from those who were involved in the transfer process was the need to systematize. Not so much on outcomes. Authors were generally happy enough with outcomes, but wanted a bit more systematization on the process. And this gives us attention. Within an ecosystem, there's going to be a perception of ranks. There's going to be a perception that this journal is better than that journal. And this is not what we're about. We all have our perceptions. We all have our various rankings. We all look at various rankings processes. The reality is this is about trying to find the best fit for a paper, the best fit for the receiving journal. So the ecosystem then consists of these journals: IRFA, IREF, reBAF, JBEF, JFIFM, Finance Research Letters, North American Journal of Economics and Finance, and Helion. All of these overlap in the middle. All of these have unique approaches. It's an enhancement of the article transfer system, which has a number of advantages. There's a one-off submission fee. Once you get into this network, into this ecosystem, you're in. There's no question of being asked for additional fees. It's a one-stop shop. As editors, we have an enhanced editorial communication platform within the ecosystem, which allows us to very quickly cross-check one with each other as to, Stefan, what did you mean about, you thought this paper was X? What, can you tell me what you meant? So it's just like a little chat channel. Think of it as a Slack channel that we can utilize. There's a single coordinating editor, which is myself, as Dana mentioned. And, you know, this is new in finance. It's been running in oncology and in medical science for a while. We've got a lot of buy-in from them as to how to help us. But as the single point of contact with the publisher, I guess, you know, the idea is that this person, who happens to be me at the moment, will over time work with the editors to smooth out the rough edges. We have clear metrics for ourselves about transfers, about the kind of transfers, the speed, etc. So that's a bit of the plumbing that we would hope to hide away to some extent from the authors, but which will improve the flow. And we have a free proofreading system. We have contracted with Inago, and we can utilize them as effectively an associate editor who will provide a free proofreading process. So sometimes papers come in and either the language or the syntax is just a bit, needs a bit of work. Rather than sending it back to the author and saying, please go off, you know, reject with offer to resubmit, we can say, look, fine, this is a good idea here. We're sending it to the proofreaders, and you're within the system now. You know, you're part of the ecosystem. You can move it forward. I think that's proving to be advantageous to authors. The feedback we're getting is that it's working well. So the ecosystem is an evolution, as these things tend to be, of an existing set of pragmatic approaches which were built to ensure that authors get a hopefully better, faster, more relevant service. Okay. Who is up next?
I think we were supposed to start with finance research letters.
So okay, let's do that.
I shall be showing my presentation. So we have two FRL editors on this call today, myself and Jonathan Batten. Narges Boubakri is our third editor, but unfortunately she's not on this call, even though she's always very happy to take some questions. You can always reach out by email. Okay, so maybe to reiterate a bit on what Brian Lucey just said, the ecosystem is in effect just, if you want, a subset of all the transfer options we have as journals, right? So while we can transfer your journal to a larger set of outlets than the ecosystem is smaller but more intensive. This translates to direct communication amongst the editors. For example, Jonathan Batten, who is the editor of Finance Research Letters, is also the editor of the Journal of International Financial Markets, Institutions and Money. So if he were to transfer your paper from FRL to his journal, obviously he would have already been very familiar with it, right? In a case where a paper gets transferred to an outlet from in the ecosystem on which myself or Jonathan aren't editors, we would know the other editor quite well, and this would allow us to communicate, right? And there's there's a communication function built into the into Editorial Manager, which allows us to do this very efficiently, right? So let me say a few words on what Finance Research Letters is, because the most important question, I think, is always, well, if this ecosystem is this one large system, which journal should I choose to submit first, right? And I think for Finance Research Letters, obviously, the idea is if your paper is short, then FRL is a very obvious choice, right? By short, we mean 2,500 words maximum, excluding references, tables, graphics, and art. There's more information about this, of course, on the website of the journal. And FRL has a very high impact factor, because what we're trying to do, and the impact factor has been rising heavily over the last few years, what we try to do is to be the premier outlet for new topical discussions, okay? And the truth is that the world of finance massively evolved over the last years, okay? And the changes are immense. And if you look at decision makers in finance today, if you look at, let's say, well, I mean, probably the most important decision makers we have in our job are, of course, the ministers for finance in different countries. They are interested in the effects of finance, in the effects of COVID-19 on finance, or the effects of very high debt, national debt from countries on finance. They're simply not interested in the efficient market hypothesis, right? So a lot of topics that we cover in these classical journals, where you would take, in a good time, 5-6 years to review your paper, they're highly interesting for all of us because they're purely theoretical, and we might think that's fascinating. But the truth is, a minister for finance, somebody working for the IMF, somebody working for the World Bank simply won't care, right? Because what he needs to know is, what is the effect of COVID-19 on the economy? What does it mean if we have Eurobonds? What does the Euro crisis mean for countries, et cetera, et cetera? And this is where Finance Research Letters is. And this is why our impact factor is rising exponentially, right? Because we are able to cover topics where other journals might want to venture, okay? And by doing so, we understand that the fields you are advancing it are often not covered by other literature, right? So we take into account that if you submit a paper to Finance Research Letters, you might be able to build upon a very strong literature, which is not a problem, okay? So this is the impact factor over time. For 2020, it will be even higher because the site score is constantly rising, and we're one of the first outlets to really cover COVID-19. So let's look at some articles. So I took from Scopus the top 3 cited articles, and I think the slide is very, very interesting because the most cited article is from October 2020, right? So it's only 6 months old, if you want, and it's about COVID-19, really showing this demand in the world for people to understand current topics, right? Another very big current topic would be cryptocurrencies, right? Where again, a lot of people said, oh, nobody cares about cryptocurrencies, it's uninteresting. but then it wouldn't be worth, you know, trillions of dollars if nobody would care about, right? So something, this massive on financial markets is of course something very important. So what is the role of finance research letters in the ecosystem? So either you can choose finance research letters as the first option, which means you would submit a short paper. If your paper either goes to review or is transferred directly in the ecosystem, makes no real difference. In any case, you will have the chance to update your paper and maybe make it larger if you are transferred to a full suite journal, right? It also works the other way around. If you transfer a very large manuscript to, let's say, the International Review of Financial Analysis, and you get transferred to finance research letters, in your first round, you will have the opportunity to shorten your manuscript and really focus on one story, right? This is often done on the advice of one of the 3 editors of finance research letters. We currently work with Enago to improve the English of manuscripts, which is free of charge, and of course only the case if there is a need in a potential future for your manuscript. The ecosystem also allows a handling editor of FRL to guide your manuscripts all the way. So very often we also have an associate editor role in certain journals. So if I would get a manuscript on FRL and I think it's a much better fit, let's say for IREF, I would transfer to IREF, and if you accept, then I will give you the opportunity to choose me as an associate editor. So I will guide your manuscript because I already did so and I'm familiar with it, which very often helps the author, right? So as I said earlier, if you are transferred to the ecosystem, you get the opportunity to revise and rewrite your manuscripts, and we all communicate on a very regular basis, right? So the work you did, and this is really the difference between the ecosystem and the regular transfer, all the work that you have put in so far, right, was not in vain, because it's all getting transferred over, and we have your manuscript on our radar, right? So so we really guide you as much as we can, and really make sure that it's not time lost on your end. So those are my few words about FRL, and I'm very happy to take questions. I know Jonathan is as well, but for the time being, then I will stop sharing and give the floor to my colleague who is next.
I think Jonathan would be next, if that's all right.
Thank you. So welcome, everyone. What I will do is just say a couple of words, a few words about the journal. Then I will provide some information that you can use yourself to help fine-tune the work that you are doing in terms of submissions. And by the way, I am Stefan Palin number 2, according to the due to there was a glitch, which is why my name is incorrectly stated on the webinar thing here. So one thing that I'll just clarify a couple of points. Firstly, with GIFMIM is fundamentally an international finance journal. We've become much more concentrated in recent years in terms of the work that we've been accepting, and that's partly because we have partly because there is the ecosystem, and also because of the large number of submissions. And so as a result of the submission flow, we have been targeting much more certain or specific areas. So for example, if I just quote some numbers, the acceptance rate on GIFMIM last year in 2020 was 11%, and we received about 600 papers. In 2019, there were 500 papers and the acceptance rate was higher. So the trend across most journals, in fact, is for more submissions and lower acceptance rates. And I'll show you in a minute where you get that information from. So in terms of desk rejects, the systems that we follow at both GIFMIM and the journal I was previously handling, which was Emerging Markets Review, are very, very similar to what has been stated before. And that is that there is an initial desk rejection possibility for a paper. There is a transfer, and then the paper will either go to reviewers or directly to a subject editor. So let me show you how you can where you can get this sort of information. Now, what I'll do is I will firstly just share this screen here. So this is the GIFMIM Elsevier website. And if you scroll down to the bottom of this, you will see a series of journal metrics. I will click on this journal insights, more journal insights in 1 second, but you can see here the papers that are the most downloaded, the ones that are the most cited, and recent papers. So if you were intending to submit to GIFMIM, I would highly recommend that you look to see, firstly, what papers are attracting interest in terms of the downloads. And you can see this is the case with other journals at the moment, and that is everything to do with crypto is interesting. But actually what's happening is that crypto was interesting probably in the last 2 or 3 years. Now what's happening is that if you look at papers in terms of submissions, we're getting a lot of papers on this last category down here, which is on environmental performance, energy finance, corporate governance, and so on. So I'm not saying that crypto isn't still important, but there is definitely a shift in terms of submissions to ESG and SRI type decisions and papers related to that. So let's have a look at the journal metrics. And you can see this is the journal metrics for GIFMIM. And all of this information is available to you across all of the journals in the Elsevier stable. And so you can see the different categories here. And probably the most important one initially for you is the acceptance rate and the review speed. So if we look at the review speed, you can see that we have been doing our best in terms of reducing the decision-making process, but all importantly, as a result of, obviously, as a result of large increases in submission flows between 2019 and 2020, that became a little bit more difficult. If we look at we can go here to the acceptance rate, which of course is another area of great interest to authors. You can see that as a general rule, the submissions into GIFMIM have increased over the last 5 years. And the unfortunate reality is that not only have the submissions increased, but the acceptance rate has also declined as well. So basically what that means, in order for you to get through this hurdle, you need to be you need to make sure that your paper is absolutely fine-tuned to the journal that you are submitting it to. Now, I might add that increasingly we are being asked by authors who have been rejected from journals which have a much higher impact factor, say, than GIFMIM, and saying, well, look, we've submitted our paper to a very high-ranked journal A, B, or C, and it was rejected. We did our best, but ultimately the paper was rejected because the editor and maybe the referees thought the paper wasn't important enough or significant enough for their journal. So we are, if any of you are in that position and you have had a rejection, then let me just tell you that we will look at that, at your paper, and in the course of the actual submission, please just upload the previous review reports and what you have done to address those concerns. And on occasion, in conjunction with typically 1 or 2 associate editors who are specialists in those areas, we can make a very quick decision on that paper. All right. So how do you make sure that your paper is the best fit for a journal? Let me give you an example. This is, let's say you have a paper, Hedging Stocks with Oil, which happens to be one of a paper that I wrote. This is the abstract. You can insert it in technology called Journal Finder, and you can see that on the web link there, or simply Google it. The website does request that you provide more information about keywords and fields of research and so on. But let me just show you the results of that as initially. So you can see that when you hit that button down here, Find Journals down here, the system will in fact generate a series of answers. And so it says that the best paper at the moment for that, the best journal for that paper would in fact be Finance Research Letters, Global Finance Journal, and a few others down there. And it also provides you with information about acceptance rates and the type of decision and so on. So that information is all there waiting for you. So there has been significant improvements in the reporting quality and the information that has been made available to authors. Now, in response to what Brian was saying before, you can see also that there are these gender diversity statistics now available across most of the Elsevier journals. And so like Brian at IRFA and IREF, we are in fact aiming to increase the representation of women and minorities, especially on the panels of our journals. And one of the other areas of great interest are in fact papers coming in from Africa and in particular South and Central America. So these two regions tend to be underrepresented at the moment in terms of the work that we publish. So we are looking especially for papers from authors in those areas and on studies in those areas as well. Now, if I can just make one other comment, what defines international, which is the key term here in GIFMIM. So we by definition, we are looking for papers that take a cross-border perspective. Now that could mean if I'm looking at a study in the United Kingdom or in, say, the Netherlands, then it's not just about, you could do a study on the Netherlands or you could do a study in the United Kingdom, but what we're interested in is the international dimension. So for example, if you were looking at Eurobond issues by Dutch corporations, or if you were looking at international investors in the Amsterdam stock market, for example, then this is something that captures this international dimension. But if you were focusing exclusively on the domestic market and domestic market issues, then by definition, it does not meet the requirements of GIFMIM, and your paper would be better suited to another journal. So hopefully I could talk about this for hours, but in the interest of time, if you have any other questions, please feel free to ask me later. Thank you. And I will stop sharing my screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Shall we continue with the presentations and take questions afterwards? I think
yep.
Stefan is next.
Okay, thank you. Now, I'm here as editor of the Journal of Behavioral and Experimental Finance, and since Sam and Jonathan have already mentioned a lot of the places where you can find information about journals and about how the ecosystem works, Brian has presented this ideally. I will focus mostly on my journal and presenting that, so we have enough space for questions later on. Now, the Journal of Behavioral and Experimental Finance, as the name already says, publishes papers that have either a behavioral component or an experimental component. And it's basically the only journal that is specifically dedicated to experimental finance. And I'm myself working in this field and scheduled to become the managing director of the Society for Experimental Finance. So there is a tight link between this community and the journal. So if you're active in experimental finance, I think the journal is a natural outlet for your work. But the second part of the journal is also for general behavioral finance studies and topics. And like Sam said, for FRL, for Finance Research Letters, JBEF also is quite happy to publish new, somewhat exotic, somewhat exploratory papers. So papers on particularly topics that are new and trending, and also sometimes using methodology that is not yet so fully established. And we also see a lot of COVID papers, cryptocurrency papers, also financial literacy, for example, is a big topic at the moment. And that brings me to my next point, which is special issues. And I'll try to share my screen as well for that for a second. Okay, I hope you can see that. So basically, that's the same page as Jonathan showed you for JFME. And if you scroll down further here, then I'll make it a bit larger maybe. You can also see there is this section announcements where you can find new information about the journal, for example, listings in, for example, in this case, the Australian Business Deans Council ranking. But what I wanted to come here for now is the call for papers. So we, at JBEF, we are very active in having special issues on new, interesting, and trending topics, of course. And we always aim to have at least one special issue open for submissions. Most of the time it's two. So at the moment we have a special issue on recent developments in financial literacy and financial education that is guest edited by Anna Maria Lusardi as the most prominent guest editor. And we have a special issue on perceptions and expectations in finance. Yeah? So how do people perceive returns and risk? But I just don't want to talk about these specifically, but just want to make you aware that special issues are often a great opportunity to get your paper also into journals where you might otherwise think that you could not get in, perhaps, because my experience, it's not always the case, but my experience is that often the acceptance rates are better in special issues than in regular issues. So if you see a special issue, maybe the acceptance rate is better. What is definitely better is the attention that your paper receives. So because it's of course bundled together with other special issue articles on the same topic. And so people who are interested in this field, stop sharing my screen. People who are interested in this field will usually look at this whole special issue and will thus see your paper maybe with a greater probability. And the way Elsevier nowadays organizes special issues is a so-called virtual special issues, which means that your paper, basically, you submit your paper, it goes through the normal editorial process, and it can get accepted and published even while the special issue is still open and even while other authors are still submitting their papers. So there is no need anymore to wait for the special issue to be completely assembled and published. Your paper gets published in a normal journal issue, but also gets listed in this special issue, which is basically on the website. So on Science Direct, for example, you have a special category that says article collections, and those there are collections for the special issues where your paper is listed, even though the papers listed in this collection may be published in different journal issues. So no need to wait for your paper to get published or to face any delays. So special issues, I think, are a very attractive way to try to publish your paper. JBEF publishes, of course, regular papers, but we're also very happy to publish review papers. We have a short paper category, also with 2,500 words like FRL. And we have a special type of paper, which is basically software papers where researchers create special software for research. So for example, running experiments online, or maybe a package for analyzing research data in a specific way. And often a lot of work goes into this, and this is a great service to the community. And then writing a paper about it, describing what you've done there, what your software can do, and how it will help other researchers in their work, can be a great way to get the word out and also to get recognition for that. So that is maybe something that could take into consideration. Now, the journal, the submissions, as my colleagues said, have been going up quite massively, especially for JBEF. We had about 200 paper submissions in 2019. This is a relatively young journal, so JBEF was only founded in 2014. We had 200 in 2019 and more than 400 last year, so we doubled our submission count last year, and we're already on track to have a big increase again this year. So our journal metrics are going up. The acceptance rate, unfortunately, is going down. But I would say this is now the optimal time to submit your paper, because in a few years' time, the journal metrics will probably be even higher, which is, as you saw from the trend that Sam showed you, also the case for many of the other journals, of course, in the ecosystem. We also try to promote your papers via our Twitter channel. And I particularly, as editor, also sometimes send out emails to researchers in the field, making them aware of papers we've recently published to get the word out about your work. And of course, we participate in the article transfer service that I think I don't need to describe again. So please think about submitting. If you have questions, do reach out, of course, later in the chat, but also later on by email if you want. And I'll be happy. Me and my co-editor will be happy to answer those. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Larissa, I think you're up next.
Thank you. Hi, good morning, everyone. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes.
My name is Dr. Larissa Elsevier, and I'm section editor of the Helion Business and Economics section. The second section editor, Pavlos Dilias, who has expertise in business analytics from Greece. So I will try to be very quick to leave some room for questions. So let me explain what Helion Business and Economics is. So as you may know, Helion is quite a large journal. So it has lots of different sections. For example, sections on environmental science, Helion environment, on medical science, etc. So Helion Business and Economics is a section in Helion journal. So this is open access journal, and obviously, as many other open access journals, it charges quite high open access publication fees. However, the benefit of being in the finance journals ecosystem, all transfers from any of the journals from the ecosystem obviously will receive full fee waiver. Yeah, so this is one of the benefits of being here in this ecosystem for authors. In terms of their key statistics, it's also quite a new section, so we are new to the game. You can see that number of submission increased from 2009 to 2020. It's almost double. So we had around 560 submissions last year. In terms of the acceptance rate is currently 17%, and we have a relatively high desk rejection rate, like for 60%, but please don't get scared from this number and from this high number, because as soon as the section been established, we try to keep the bar very, very high because it's open access journal and it's not yet established as other journals. We decided that we need to have very rigorous reviewing process and to try to accept only the best papers, again, to improve its performance. So we're also trying to expand and update the editorial board at the moment, also considering the issues of diversity. We're trying to achieve a gender balance. Currently, we have around 30% females on the editorial board, and also diversify geographically editorial boards as well. And also we are looking for editors from Latin America, from Sub-Saharan Africa. We still need more editors from Asia. Yeah, so if you are interested or you know good colleagues who want to join the editorial board, please let me know. In terms of the decision times, we're also trying to be very quick till our first decision. And I think currently we have around 56 days till the first decision after the review. However, if the paper getting desk rejection, normally we still provide some comments, and this decision will be very quick, like no longer than 2 weeks. Normally, you already will be able to hear from us. Helion Business and Economics accepts a wide variety of papers, and I think in terms of all the journals in the ecosystem, it's the broadest in scope. And we have associate editors with expertise in tourism, with expertise in environmental science. So any papers that have a twist in terms of their, I saw something a bit more unconventional from finance. For example, tourism papers that have strong economics implications or strong financial implications as well. They're welcome to this session. Therefore, I think this section for the ecosystem provide more room to fit and to accommodate excellent papers that probably will not be direct match and direct feed either in FRL or IRFA or GMFIM. Again, for all the articles that will be transferred from any journal from the ecosystem, especially those post-review transfer, because occasionally, unfortunately, the papers might be rejected after the review when authors already received quite a good amount of comments. For these papers, we will try to arrange a much quicker reviewing process and we'll make decision pretty quick. I think that's all from me. So we'll have like 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Larissa, and thank you all for your presentations. Please write questions in the chat, and we can also answer the questions afterwards because we only have 5 minutes. If there are now questions that you'd like to ask directly, please, this is the moment.
Don't be shy.
There's one comment in the chat.
Basically, the person is saying that their paper was, the paper was judged too long for FRL and was offered a transfer. And it was unclear as to how to amend the paper in order to better explain, describe some details. I'm a bit confused. Were you saying the paper was too long for FRL and FRL said, look, maybe this is better at
Different
IRFA, IREF, or was it that it was transferred somewhere else? Okay. Yeah, I mean, maybe the editors want to jump in there.
I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure where your paper was transferred to, but usually you would get an opportunity from the editor of the receiving journal to change it before it's sent to review, or okay, it was transferred to another journal. Did you? So normally when you accept the transfer, there's an entire new process, right? So you can upload a new cover letter, you can add details in your submission. So you can in the submission say. During the submission process, normally you can amend the files, or at least in the cover letter, you can say that you'd like to amend certain things. But I'm not entirely sure which journal you transfer to. So I presume I was probably the one who transferred your paper, but I'm not entirely sure where it was transferred to, right? So
there's a question on the question and answer. Only FRL and JBEF accept short papers. As far as I know, I mean, IREF, IRFA, Jonathan, we tend to take full length papers, which are usually 5,000 to 10,000 words. So if you have a shorter, Helion as well, yeah. If you have a short
papers,
yeah. So if you have a short communication, there are options there, yes.
Yeah, if I could, if I can just chip in here as well. So I think it's important to, we do have the ability to transfer papers that have been received in FRL into economics letters. So if they're, for example, papers on macroeconomics or more pure monetary policy papers are probably not suited to FRL, but we can transfer them to economics letters. But the papers have to be short, and that is, like, we're not going to be too tough on authors if it's a few hundred words over. But if the paper is 10,000, 15,000 words, then it obviously would need to be edited significantly prior to it being available for passing on to subject editors and so on. So that is a problem. So what we typically do, or rather, if I am a handling editor at FRL and I receive a long paper, I will then make a recommendation it be transferred to, for example, GIFMIM or Emerging Markets Review or some other journal, depending on my perception of the content of the paper and how it fits in with the scope, aims and scope of that journal.
There was a further question about what areas should people working in MENA focus on to get published. It's the same as anywhere else. You focus on areas that are of importance either to the journal that you're focusing at. So if you have an interesting natural experiment, if you have an interesting behavioral quirk, it might well be that there's something only happening in Oman or in Tunisia, but it might well be of interest to Stefan and Michael, or possibly to Larissa. It's unlikely to be intrinsically of interest to the more international focused journals. However, if you've got comparative either cross-country experiences, data, or implications that are coming from your local region, then the world is your oyster. I would say don't be shy about focusing on local issues for local focused journals. I mean, part of our role as academics is to speak to our local community. But if you're trying to speak to an international community, you need to have an international message. And the things that firms and individuals face, the constraints, the issues around ESG, around social responsibility, around corporate governance, around the impact of exogenous shocks, around green and climate change, around capital structure decisions are global. And your local experience colors your contribution to the global debate.
Thank you, Brian. It's 11 o'clock here in Holland. I think we're going to end our webinar here. Thank you again for participating to everyone. I hope it was useful and informative, and it gave an opportunity for everyone to meet one another, especially now that nobody's going to conferences, almost nobody. Thank you again. And have a very nice rest of the day.
Thank you all. Thank you all, delegates. Thank you, Dan and Christine, for organizing this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And see some of you all later.
Yes. Bye-bye.